Continuously being a student of everything that is in your line of sight and that you could put your hands on inside the data center.
Really kind of tying into what our customers want, really hitting hard on market segmentation, making sure that it is, we fully understand what our customers are looking for.
Read who all the major players are, understand who the big data center operators are, understand who's backing them, understand who's running them. Learn as much as you can about every aspect of the industry, really.
So I think that also shifts a lot of the marketing focus and communication focus into sustainability, because these are obligations we have to be able to fulfill here.
And our industry is getting more complex, not less. So, there's definitely more, I would say, demand from a salesperson. It's not picking up the phone and dialing. That's not what's getting deals done today. It's understanding their IT needs. Really, at the end of the day, that's what's getting deals done.
If we look at that experience and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, regardless of whether you're selling a data center, a tower, a piece of fiber, a managed solution, whatever that is, the experience matters.
We started promoting our JetStore and RAID and just having our first customers. And now we're up to 4,000 customers and 30 years in business after all this time.
You still cannot power a data center from a solar panel array. It's great for the support systems. It's great for ESG, but we're looking now at hydrogen. We're looking at natural gas. We're looking at nuclear, as well as battery technology. Let's not forget the support system part. So
if you work in data center, you need to understand anything from real estate and energy to power and cooling and networks and software and hardware.
Whenever you're dealing with companies with data centers, there are always going to be multiple stakeholders who are involved. So it's not just IT by any stretch. You've also got CFOs, you've got CDOs or CTOs, CIOs.
Welcome to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. And we're thrilled to have you join us for this week's live stream show where I answer some of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the data center ecosystem, regardless of whether you work in sales, marketing, customer success or account management, channel partnerships, product management, or perhaps you're the executive sponsor that brings the full go-to-market initiative team, GTM team together. And it doesn't matter what part of the data center ecosystem you're in. Perhaps you're from an operator like colocation, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, or a modular provider, or perhaps you're from a technology or facilities company that sells to or partners with data centers, or maybe you are from a construction or real estate or outsourced sales and marketing company that sells to or partners with companies in and around the data center ecosystem. But if you are looking to grow your personal influence, your team's influence, your company's role in the growth of the data center industry, you are for sure in the right place. This week, what is on the agenda? What are we going to be looking at? We're going to start by talking about how a telecommunications company can find the right data center customers. Then we'll transition to looking at how a data center marketing and sales consultant reaches the right decision makers. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a digital infrastructure investment firm can impact sales cycles for data center related businesses. Then we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll look at how a data center hosting, connectivity, and cloud provider gets clients to move to the cloud. Next, we'll talk about how a data center wire and cabling company can identify and address market needs. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll look at how a building information modeling BIM startups can gain brand awareness within the data center industry. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question. How does a telecommunications company find the right data center customers, the right data center clients? How does a telecommunications related company find the right data center customers and clients? I think a lot of it comes down to what part of telecommunications your company is involved in. Or do you just resell telecommunications related services? Perhaps like you'd consider yourself a consultant or a broker or a channel partner type of rep? Are you a carrier? Do you provide niche products or services, testing, or some kind of monitoring or software for telecommunications that works with the data center industry? This will be very, very predictive of how you create the right kinds of marketing and sales motions, the right go-to-market strategy for finding the right customers. So as long as your company is already established, you likely already have a book of business. You likely already have a customer or client list. And from that, we're going to use that as the basis for prioritizing what to do first around our goals, our SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals around new client acquisition, new client growth, and new revenue growth. This looks like it's focused primarily on net new customers, net new logos, as it's sometimes called, if you're going after enterprise clients as opposed to revenue growth. So once we know where your company has been most successful, then we'll document our ideal client profile so we know geographically where are these data centers going to be located. Can you sell globally? Or can you only sell within a certain continent or within certain countries or just a single country or just a region of a country? That's going to be incredibly important to finding the right data center customers, of course, is what your company's capabilities are and where you can actually install these circuits. Second is the company sizes, the size of the data centers where you tend to be most successful. Have you done well across the board, even with the smallest like single location, co-location operators with a handful of employees, all the way up to the biggest global data center operators, the NTTs, the Equinixes, the Digital Realties, and then of course all the ones in between. So is your company getting a lot of success, or your clients getting a lot of success regardless of their company size? Or is there a certain kind of too big and too small band range that we need to set up here for amount of megawatts, for amount of square footage, or for something as mundane as being able to look in LinkedIn Sales Navigator and say, okay, we want companies in digital infrastructure, in data centers that have between 50 and 5,000 employees or something like that, or between 50 and 1,000 employees. Only you can tell me what that right band is. A lot of it's going to depend on where your account managers, where your customer success managers have had the greatest results. Where are your clients the happiest based on what you do with your telecommunications in and around the data center industry, your interconnects, your peering arrangements, whatever you're doing in the data center space. So there's a geographic component, there's a company size component, and then there's likely also a business model or an industry component, depending on the nature of the data center operator. Like, what do they specialize in? And do you have the capabilities to be able to support them at the intersection of their geographic region and their vertical industry focus? Because, of course, there's certain regions of the world where there's regulatory issues across the board, but then there's also certain regions of the world where there's regulatory issues that are specific to both the location of the data center, as well as the kinds of clients, the kinds of industries that are located within that facility. So that will help you sharpen your ideal client profile. From there, you should be able to build out a target account list of a few dozen or a few hundred, maybe even a few thousand potential data center operators that you want to do business with. And then within those companies, we need to know who we need to be educating and building trust with. Those are going to be the individual kinds of buyer personas, which is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal kind of stakeholder based on actual research and some select educated speculation. Most people tend to, as a starting point, think of buyer personas as job titles, but they're much more than that. A buyer persona is a representation of a group of kinds of people within across the board at your client base. And what they have in common is their shared goals and their shared struggles, their shared challenges. And the way you figure these out is by talking to your buyer personas or surveying them or see how they describe themselves, what they put on their LinkedIn profile, what kinds of content they share, what kind of groups they belong to, what events they go to. When you find these commonalities in their own words, and that's the key thing here, is we need their own words, not what you think their words are, but what their words actually are. You arrive at a consensus for what should go on that buyer persona document, which generally, if you're looking to do this pretty intensively, should be a lot more than would fit on the back of an envelope. Is probably a couple pages of detail on their goals and challenges. And from there, you can build an educational content calendar, an events calendar for your events that educate and build trust. It could be a lot of webinars and live streams like this. It could also be some offline versions of that, like symposiums that you hold, that you sponsor, conferences that you hold, that you run yourself, where you can dramatically influence the editorial content, or just simple basic things like simple basic events like breakfast seminars, lunch and learns. The key thing is it's heavily focused on attracting the right people and educating and building trust with those people, so you are able to intercept them as early as possible in their buyer's journey. We now live in a world where most of your data center customers that are looking for telecommunication services don't want to talk with your sales team anymore. And if they do want to talk with them at all, it's going to be at the extreme end of their buyer's journey. Like 10 years ago, people in this industry would talk to sales teams when they were like halfway through the buyer's journey. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board, did research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions, and they found about 56% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact, before sales contact. CEB is now part of Gartner, and Gartner more recently updated that data and found that about 83% of a typical buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, now happens before sales contact. So 83% of their research and decision-making process is over before they're willing to meet someone from your sales team. So it's incredibly important that we figure out a way to use educational content, educational events to get in early, so that they no longer want your sales team to be perceived as traditional transaction-focused sales professionals. They need to show up as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders. And when you do this well, you will spend a significant amount of the typical 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision with your ideal clients. When you completely drop the ball on this, if you're lucky, maybe you're in on 1 or 2 or 3 of those touch points of the 28 between complete stranger and purchase decision. A lot of companies in this space invest really aggressively in sponsoring other people's events and field marketing, but you don't get extra credit because the cabana party was epic or the golf tournament was amazing, though still each only counts as 1 touch point. So we need a way to make sure that we're spending a lot of time with our ideal clients, showing them valuable insights on how other companies, other stakeholders in these companies have navigated through similar kind of research and decision-making processes. They no longer need your sales team to show up and read the website to them. They need your sales team to show up and look a lot more like Big Four consultants, as if they work for like EY, KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, something like that. Because we need to make it so, we need to establish conditions so that your prospects and clients want to spend time with members of your sales team, as opposed to your sales team having to beg, cajole, manipulate, and bribe those folks to show up. So at the end of the day, for a telecommunications company that wants to find the right data center customers, we need to become very self-aware of understanding that the entire way that your data center customers research and make purchase decisions around telecommunications has completely changed. It's very unlikely that we're going to go back to the days of dial-up modems or fax machines or printed phone books or printed trade publications being the dominant tools. We are where we are. We know people want a self-driven buyer's journey. Part of it is a changing of the guard as we've moved from decision-making being predominantly made by baby boomers to Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. We know that during the early 2020s, with people working from home, digital transformation accelerated even faster. And the question is, do you want to live in the current? Do you want to be responsive to the way that your buyers actually want to buy? Or are you going to be living in the past and selling to the 5 or 10% of the people that are digitally resistant? If you want to tap into the data center CTOs and telecommunications managers and operations managers and all those folks that are heavily involved in making decisions around telecommunications, I'd encourage you to make sure that you update your playbook to how your data center customers are researching and comparing their telecommunications options and ultimately making telecommunications purchase decisions in the modern buyer's journey. Next question up is, how does a data center marketing and sales consulting firm reach decision makers? How does a company that provides data center marketing and sales consulting services reach decision makers? Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And what it largely comes down to is first understanding your business model, what kinds of consulting services you're providing, and figuring out, does your company already have product market fit, or are you trying to get to product market fit? In other words, do you know exactly who the perfect clients are, what kinds of services they purchase from your firm, at what price points, for what duration, how long the sales cycle is, and basically have clarity, at least a reasonable amount, on the basic unit economics, like the lifetime value of a client, the cost of acquisition of a client, the profitability of a client, the average sales cycle length. When you have clarity on those, you probably have at least achieved product market fit, PMF, and you may be on your way to achieving go-to-market fit, GTMF. The difference between product market fit and go-to-market fit is go-to-market fit means that you've gotten far enough along in scaling beyond founder-led sales to know that when you invest capital in growing your sales and marketing growth engine, you know what's going to come out on the other side. So with that in mind, depending on the maturity of your firm, you may either know exactly who the clients are that you're going after and what services they would purchase from your consulting firm, or you may be trying to accelerate getting to that place. And a lot of the growth plan, a lot of the go-to-market strategy will depend on the stage that your company is at. But at the end of the day, if you don't yet have product market fit, if you don't yet have go-to-market fit, you likely have at least a rough idea, a hypothesis, a goal of who you think your clients are going to be. And that should be documented into an ideal client profile. Can you realistically provide these services globally and potentially 5, 10 or more different languages localized to the communications that those individual regions need? Or are you primarily focusing on a couple of different countries, on a particular continent, on a particular region? And again, a lot of that's going to depend on your product services roadmap and your internal team's capabilities. So think about in the ideal client profile, or thinking about the geographic component. The second part of that is size. What size companies in the data center ecosystem are going to be the best fit for your consulting services? Are you primarily working with startups, scale-ups, and small businesses that have anywhere from a handful or two of employees up to a few dozen employees, maybe a little bit more? Are you working with enterprises? Are your services deeply niched enough? Is your company well-established enough that you could reasonably sell to a company like Equinix or Digital Realty or QTS or Flexential or NTT or some other Vantage or some other big national or global data center operator? Or are you targeting somewhere in the middle? And again, a lot of understanding the direction to go in with geographical targeting is at the intersection of who you can reasonably sell and service to based on your term's internal capabilities. The company size targeting will also largely be a function of who you can reasonably sell and service to, given your existing focus and your existing team's expertise and capabilities. And then there's likely also a business model or vertical industry component to this as well, because depending on the kinds of companies you sell to and their buyer personas, there could be additional expertise that you need to have in order to be effective in a sales and marketing consultancy route. Depending on the region, again, of course, the region could introduce localization and language type of capabilities that are required. And depending on their vertical specialization, if they're selling, for example, to a highly regulated industry like healthcare or financial services or something like that, then you may need certain capabilities to be successful in a marketing and sales consultancy role. So once you have that in mind, the geographic part of it, the company size part of it, who they sell to, their buyer personas, which you usually can tell by looking at their website. If you can't tell that from looking at your website, they probably need you really badly. But usually you can get a reasonably good idea of a target account focus, who they are selling to, who their concentrations, and essentially your ideal client profile should reflect the amalgamation, the consensus on that. And from there, you should be able to build out a target account list of a few dozen, a few hundred, maybe even a few thousand potential clients that you want to target. Then you need to understand who the buyer personas are in those accounts. Who do you need to be building a relationship with? Who do you need to educate and build trust with to advance the sales process? And again, just because you're in marketing and sales doesn't mean that you're immune to the way that people now research and make purchase decisions. We live in a world where people now are incredibly allergic to spending time with salespeople. And because of that, self-propelled is the predominant buyer's journey. So in that world, once you understand the company side, once you understand the company profile and the individual buyer personas and the consensus on those personas' biggest goals and challenges, you need educational content, you need educational events, so you can spend a significant amount of the typical 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, educating and building trust, framing the purchase criteria, not only addressing the goals and challenges and questions that they have, but helping to lead them down a path based on your muscle memory, your knowledge, the pattern recognition that you've seen in similar kinds of companies and similar stakeholders in the companies of what they typically are looking at step 2, step 3, step 4, all the way throughout the full awareness, consideration, and decision parts of the buyer's journey. So for reaching the decision makers, a lot of it comes down to being able to consistently and specifically focus on the kinds of strategies that you would likely talk to your clients about. And in terms of decision makers, let's be clear here. The idea of the monolithic decision maker, where you somehow have a magic introduction with a door opener or something like that to the perfect person, doesn't really exist in most companies anymore. In nearly all cases, decisions are now made by committee. So what that means is, even if you initially are able to get the attention of the chief commercial officer or chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer, CEO, whoever is the right person for your marketing and sales consultancy services, inevitably they're going to bump it down to their team. So because of that, that is where having educational resources, educational content, educational events is incredibly impactful, because when you win over the first person from that company, from the committee, you're building in the natural kinds of marketing automations that I don't know why most companies still don't do this. It's certainly been available for 20 years, but it's as simple as like, hi, Bob, we're so glad that you registered for our webinar next week, but did you know that social selling, did you know that account-based marketing, did you know that building a brand in the data center industry, it takes a village, it takes a team. It typically involves stakeholders from this department, that team, this team, that team. So with that in mind, is there anyone else from your company that should also be watching this, should be attending this? If so, just simply hit the forward button, let them know why, and feel free to CC me if you want as well. And you'll know this is working because you look down at your CRM, your whatever you're using to track your event registration. You're like, cool, 3, 4, 5 people from the same company just registered within a few minutes of each other, within a few hours of each other. I bet they're talking about us. And that's the beginning of knocking down the first domino to getting around the full decision committee, getting to the decision makers. So That's how I would approach a data center marketing and sales consulting firm reaching the right decision makers. And so much of this is just recognizing that the way that people research and make purchase decisions is so different today than it was as recently as 10 years ago. Make sure that your playbook is updated to reflect these realities, because if you're not reflecting how you go to market, how are you actually going to be helpful with your clients who are likely selling to similar kinds of stakeholders that now have similar kinds of preferences, which by default means they're incredibly allergic to anything that looks like sales. So we need to show up as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders, and truly, truly add value throughout the full buyer's journey. Next question is, how can a digital infrastructure investment firm impact sales cycles for data center businesses? So how does a company that is primarily in the business of being an investor in digital infrastructure impact sales cycles for data center businesses? That is a terrific question, because companies that provide venture capital or private equity for digital infrastructure for data centers, almost certainly, if there's a significant equity stake, are going to be holding board of directors seats for an individual company. And because of that, essentially the CEO, the CMO, the CRO, the chief commercial officer, they all basically report to the board. So those board seats allow your investment company to hold a tremendous amount of power over how digital infrastructure companies go to market and potentially address sales cycle length. So one of the things that I have seen across the board among digitally savvy VC and private equity firms, PE firms, is the idea of getting the similar stakeholders from different companies together for events on a pretty regular basis to share best practices. And sometimes it's peer-to-peer learning, sometimes it's bringing in experts. But say, for example, you're an investment company and across your portfolio, you have a dozen strategic investments in and around or adjacent to digital infrastructure. And presumably in all of these 12 companies, there's a head of sales, there's a head of marketing, there's a head of product, there's a head of account management, there's a head of channel partnerships, what have you. And you decide that it seems like the sales cycle length seems like it's much longer than what the benchmarks would show for the digital infrastructure industry. So regardless of whether this is an in-person event, if it's geographically convenient, or a webinar series, you basically invite the heads of marketing and the heads of sales for your portfolio companies, and maybe once a month together, you're just talking through best practices on sales cycle acceleration. And maybe every so often you're talking about offline events and online events and webinar strategy. You're talking about how to better do customer insight research, both initially and on an iterative basis, how to better segment leads in CRM, how to do better email marketing, personalization, customization, account-based marketing, all of the typical strategies that a chief revenue officer, a chief marketing officer, a chief commercial officer would talk about internally, except you're hoping to cross-pollinate all of those best practices across all 12 companies, all 12 revenue teams, all 12 go-to-market teams throughout your full portfolio. And again, peer-to-peer learning is fine. If there's subject matter experts that are part of your own team as the PE or the private equity company or the venture capital company, they can feel free to moderate. People can take a turn teaching to their peers if they have that expertise, or you bring in speakers. But that's essentially would be the best way for a digital infrastructure investment company to impact sales cycles, to improve sales cycles for data center related businesses, is start with education. And then of course you could potentially have leaderboards, transparency dashboards, where assuming that you can truly do apples to apples across your portfolio company, which may not be possible because most investment companies typically like to have some degree of diversification. They really don't want to have portfolio companies feel like they're on a collision course as direct competitors with each other. But to the extent that you can normalize or have a reasonable degree of parity across the metrics, you could potentially have some transparency as well. So different companies, different portfolio companies can see overall how the group of 12 is doing with impacting their sales cycle length based on different demand generation experiments, sales enablement experiments that are being run. So at a high level, that's what I would look to do. If you're doing virtual events or in-person events, of course, engage in the best practice of recording the events. If they're in person, hire a videographer, put the slides and the transcripts and the recordings in a wiki kind of area, protected area that just your portfolio companies can get access to. So as new people are hired, they can go back and watch the highlights and recaps and everything. And over time, you're essentially running like a sales cycle acceleration or demand generation sales enablement kind of academy or university that's unique to your portfolio companies to help them get a competitive advantage. So that's what I would think about for a digital infrastructure investment company that wants to impact sales cycles for data center related businesses. So we'll take a quick break, then we'll come back with 3 more questions in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you're watching our weekly live stream, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I answer a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout go-to-market teams throughout the data center ecosystem. Next question up for this week, we're going to look at how can a data center hosting, connectivity, and cloud provider company get clients to move to the cloud. So this is a company that's probably a little more a technology-focused company than just a data center operator, perhaps even may consider itself IaaS or infrastructure as a service. And it provides a couple of different lines of business. It provides hosting, connectivity, and cloud services. And it's trying to get more of its clients to move to the cloud. So that sounds like a lot of its clients are either co-locating or have premise-based solutions or a combination of the two. So the first decision point we need to grapple with is, are these all the same clients? Are you able to sell hosting, connectivity, and cloud services to all of the same kind of clients? Or is these 3 different lines of business historically been addressed through 3 different marketing playbooks and 3 different kinds of sales teams? In most cases, companies look to have it be a consistent client base, regardless of the company size and focus, because there's just so much more efficiencies when it comes to your unit economics with figuring out monthly recurring, annual recurring revenue, lifetime value, average cost of acquisition, sales cycle length, profitability, all those really important unit economics for knowing that your company is on the right track, that you have pattern recognition around things like product market fit and go-to-market fit. So to get more of your clients to move to the cloud, the first thing we want to do is, if you have the luxury of having a product manager, or there's someone internally who often, at least on a part-time basis, wears the hat of the product manager, we need to understand why your clients are resistant to moving to the cloud. And then we also need to understand the tangible benefits that your clients have received from moving to the cloud. So regardless of whether these are user interviews in person or over Zoom or through surveys or all of the above, we need to get our minds around what actually are the motivations for what's the value, what's the initial value, intended value, and extended value that your clients have received from moving to the cloud. And ideally, these will show up on your website as case study interviews. the most impactful case study interviews are probably video based. And then from video, it's really easy to go to other formats. And we're looking for the common, what did they have in common? Do they have enough in common? And from there, we'll back into what the drivers are. And from there, we can back into like a content strategy or product marketing strategy for how we educate and build trust with the rest of our prospects, with the rest of our clients about the benefits of moving to the cloud. So there's really two different processes that I'd encourage you to engage in. If you have a core group of, say, early adopters that are getting a lot of benefits from being in the cloud, and then you have a whole bunch of laggards that are customers, then you essentially want to engage in a concerted effort to convert more of those customers to cloud-leaning, cloud-favoring, cloud-interested kinds of clients. And one of the best ways to do this is to use a combination of email marketing and events that's targeted at educating and building trust with this segment of your customers. When it comes to events, perhaps the most impactful kind of customer marketing, which is kind of like a hybrid between traditional marketing and customer success or account management. One of the most impactful ways to drive this kind of motivation is to cross-pollinate your cloud-happy clients with your cloud-resistant clients. And one of the best ways to cross-pollinate them is to invite them all to the same events, which from a practical standpoint, if they're not all geographically clustered in the same area, you're probably talking about a webinar series where each month, each week, each quarter, whatever it is, you interview your cloud-happy, cloud-delighted clients about the kinds of technology problems and business problems they were having before they moved to the cloud. What were the frustrations? What were the delays? All the different kinds of negativities that were going on before they moved to the cloud. Then you talk about what the configuration looked like for them moving to the cloud. What was the process like? Was it public cloud? Was it private cloud? Was it hybrid? Was it multi-cloud? This is where your product manager will spend time interviewing your happy client, and they'll talk about why you made certain decisions to go in a certain direction with their cloud investments. And then once your audience understands that, then you talk about the tangible benefits, ideally the financial benefits that your cloud migrated clients have achieved from going down this path. So there's like 3 essential sections. This is classic case study kind of format. This is the problem. This is how we solved the problem. And these were the benefits that the client realized by solving this problem. And if you simply do this process of taking your cloud delighted clients and introducing them to your cloud resistance clients, that will make an enormous impact in getting forward momentum going and getting more of your data center hosting, data center connectivity, and data center cloud resistant clients to move more to the cloud. Then, of course, you can also do versions of this same webinar series for your future clients, for your prospects. Again, except instead of it being a product manager, maybe it's a marketer, event marketer, or sales enablement kind of person running this, or you may be able to, depending on your company's resources, it may make sense to just combine all of this together, where you invite your existing clients that are cloud, that haven't yet migrated to the cloud, and your existing prospects that are curious about what it is that your company is doing and maybe have signed up for your newsletter or visited a booth at an event you were sponsoring or come to other webinars. And you again invite them together. And the star of the show, your hero, is your cloud happy, your cloud delighted kind of client. And you're providing some educational value. Another way to do this that's a super interesting play is instead of just interviewing one client at a time, you have a panel of multiple clients that have gone through the same kind of migration path. Except instead of being the news anchor on CNN or CNBC or CBC or whatever it is, you're just interviewing multiple stakeholders at the same time, similar to what you might do if you were moderating a panel at a offline event, except you're doing this online. And of course, you're going to record this for the 70%, 60%, whatever it is that registered but wasn't able to attend. And you're going to record it because there's going to be stakeholders within customers and within prospects whose other team members didn't get to attend, but should certainly get exposed to this kind of content, get exposed to this kind of event experience by watching the recording. And then there's just an enormous repurposing opportunity for people that could consume small sections of it in a couple minute segments at a time, or blog post versions of that, or even shorts, under 59-second clips of that, and perhaps carousels, documents, infographics, what have you, that are all focused on the same central theme of getting cloud resistant companies to see what the FOMO, to see what they're missing out on, the fear of missing out on by not being on one of your cloud recommended platforms. And again, there's a variety of ways to do this, but at the end of the day, we're looking to take the enthusiasm, the benefits, the tangibles that your cloud delighted clients have achieved, and getting your cloud resistant prospects, getting your cloud resistant customers to understand what they're missing out on. So that's how a data center hosting, connectivity, and cloud provider company can get clients to move to the cloud. And of course, if your clients are all clustered in a geographic area together, then you can open this up to not just be a webinar or live stream kind of program. You can do the same version in your training classroom, in your conference room, renting out space at a restaurant, or some other relatively cost-effective way to bring together a mix of your most happy cloud delighted clients and the cloud resistant clients. And to the extent that you can make this an educational event, it has even higher perceived value. And that's what most people will want to show up for. No one wants to be pitched anymore. You think of yourself as a tour guide, as a concierge that's helping your prospects, that's helping your clients better navigate the researching and the comparing of options and evaluating the different pricing options that come up when it comes to evaluating cloud. So again, these are some of the most important considerations for a data center hosting, connectivity, and cloud provider that wants to get its clients to move to the cloud. Next question up is, how does a data center wiring cabling company identify and address market needs? How does a data center wire and cabling company identify and address market needs? There's a couple of different ways to approach this. The easy way, the lazy way of approaching this is trying to copy off of everyone else's homework. Remember the really narcissistic classmate that you had in high school or college and university or something like that, that's always trying to get their friends or classmates to give them the answers to the questions and let them copy their assignments off of them and everything. And we're not going to get on the soapbox here of academic integrity and everything like that, but understand that if you're in the grown-up version of that, and all you're doing is you're looking at everyone else's research and reading their blog posts and reading their research reports and kind of spying on what they're doing, you're only getting one piece of the puzzle. Because unless your product and services roadmap is identical to theirs, unless your company is at the same growth and maturity stage as theirs, unless their ideal client profile and their buyer personas are identical to yours, and their team composition, their expertise is identical to yours, there's a really good chance that you're taking some shortcuts that you really shouldn't be taking. And again, I know this may be painful to hear if your company has a very expensive subscription to one of the dominant research companies in this space, but I would encourage you to use other people's research as no more than 20% of your decision process to feeling like you have a good handle on identifying and addressing market needs. It's okay to have some assumptions in there. It's okay to have other people's research in there, but don't make it more than like 20-25% of how you go about synthesizing all this. Most of identifying and addressing the market needs is going to come from doing a better job of staying closer to your market than anyone else in the market. Getting in early, getting there often, getting unique customer insights that are just nobody else is paying attention to in the space. That's how you get a very clear point of differentiation deep in the buyer's journey at the decision stage. And then we need to focus on who are the ideal companies that need these kinds of wiring, cabling services, products and services. Where are they located? What are their sizes? Are there certain business models or industries that are more conducive than others to the wiring, cabling kind of products and services that you provide. Once you have that, you'll be in a better position to carve out your target account list. You'll be in a better position to identify your buyer personas. But essentially, once we are laser focused on the companies and the individuals within the companies, we need to get closer to them than anyone else in the marketplace to better understand for starters, what the segmentation needs to look like. A lot of companies are way too lazy when it comes to segmentation. They're copying everyone else's segmentation, or they're putting too many people in the same general bucket. And it's not so much that we're going to segment by job title or company size. We need to segment for what these kinds of stakeholders have in common when it comes to their biggest goals and their challenges around what your company does, wiring and cabling. So we need to understand the kinds of wiring cabling initiatives that they're working on, that if they get right, will get them a big promotion, that'll get their team a big bonus, that'll get their company to go to the next level of growth. That's on the goals side. And on the goals side, we can't just copy our competitors' homework. We need to know our buyers, our customers, our prospects' own words on how they describe these goals. And these are going to come from user interviews. They could be in person. They could be over video. They could be surveys. It could be studying how they describe themselves and what you can infer about that by looking at search and social footprints for these kinds of folks. But we really, really need their own words on their biggest goals. And we also need their own words on their biggest stressors, on their biggest challenges, on their biggest frustrations. This is how you're going to get to the root of what their identities look like and what their market needs look like in their own words. And then from there, it's a matter of prioritizing the consensus on what you're hearing at the intersection of your company's current and near future product roadmap. Because it's great to understand what these buyer personas are trying to do for their job. It's great to understand what they're struggling with, but we still need to ground this in the reality of how your company is going to pay the bills, of how your company is going to monetize this insight. And this is going to come from taking that research and putting on your product manager hats and understanding where you are today with your wiring cabling product line with your portfolio and where you intend to be in the coming months. That's going to be the most telling way for you to identify and address the market needs for your data center wiring and cabling company. And just understand too that this is definitely not a set it and forget it kind of initiative. Marketplaces are dynamic. There's always new kinds of buyers entering, some buyers exiting, as in the case of, if you look at a multi-year time horizon, you can see the passing of the torch between, for example, the baby boomer generation down to Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. And then there's also industry issues that are going on. As one of the huge things going on right now in the data center industry is all companies are grappling with a shortage of utility grid power. A lot of legacy data centers are becoming decommissioned or having to be repurposed, as so many companies need a much greater density than they ever had in the past to be able to support AI applications and high performance compute and similar kinds of applications. So there's dynamic natures of the industry. There's constraints within the industry. There's different kinds of buyers, and there's different kinds of competitors that come and go: direct competitors, indirect competitors, non-business model competitors. That's why we're always going to be listening. And one of my favorite ways of listening on a regular basis is if your company is heavily invested in creating educational content and educational events, there's a strong likelihood that you put forms in front of your ideal buyers when they go to download a report or an ebook, or when they go to register for an event or a webinar. And one of the most interesting things that you can do to continually be listening for these insights and market needs is to add a write-in field, add a write-in contact property to these forms that just simply asks, what's your biggest wiring and cabling challenge that you're currently going through? What's your biggest struggle with wiring and cabling? What's the biggest question that you have about wiring and cabling? And not only will their own words be incredibly valuable to your sales team, because that data will go right on their contact record in your CRM, but in aggregate, when you look at all the people that converted on this particular landing page, you'll know the consensus. And when you look across all of your landing pages, across all of your forms, you'll see even greater consensus. And this really doesn't take much time to stay on top of on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis to give you enormous insights on unfulfilled market needs. If you do events and webinars, you can do surveys. You can do surveys that support state of kind of research reports that give you additional insights into identifying and addressing market needs. All of these are grassroots ways that even the smallest of small resource-constrained companies can use to get their mind around how a company that does wiring and cabling products and services in and around the data center industry can identify and address market needs. So that brings us to our sixth and final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. So the final question for this week has to do with facilities and construction, and specifically how a building information modeling BIM startup gains brand awareness in the data center industry. So how does a software services kind of company that's focused on building information modeling, BIM, BIM, gain brand awareness in the data center industry? It starts by figuring out how broad you want to go or how narrow you want to be. And a lot of that comes down to looking at your current product capabilities, looking at your current services capabilities, assuming you also provide professional services around that, and figuring out where you've been most successful. And if it's a brand new company, where you anticipate being most successful, understanding that it's much easier to get a beachhead in a narrow segment, to get success in a narrow segment of the market, and then expand from there. But if your company is well established, you likely have some muscle memory and have some pattern recognition, or maybe even a case studies page on your website that makes this significantly easier. And we're looking for the commonalities of what your clients have, your data center clients have, that need building information modeling. Are they located in certain geographic regions? In other words, is your company better suited to serve data center clients in certain regions than others? Can you truly serve globally? Or are there certain continents, are there certain countries, are there certain regions within countries that are a better fit than others because of the nature of language capabilities, location of your sales and services companies, perhaps localization issues around the user interface and feature capabilities and compliance and feature set, all the basic roadmap stuff that typically comes up. So when we're defining your ideal client profile among data center clients, among the data center industry, are we targeting globally or are we targeting specific areas? The next area that we'll want to confront is, are we equally suited to work with huge data center companies, or are we better suited at working with companies that are mid-market or perhaps even really small companies? For a lot of the companies that I work with, regardless of whether they're operators, IT facilities, construction, real estate related companies, they typically have a Goldilocks decision going on when it comes to company size. There's usually what's too hot, and what's too cold, what's too small. So there's usually, for a company that would be focused on something like building information modeling, there would be a certain company size that's too large, and there would be where they would more likely need a more sophisticated solution, or they would perhaps do parts of this internally or something like that, or the sales process would be too long or too complicated for us to be able to carry, a multi-year sales process or something like that. And then there's usually a company size that's too small, where you're aware of what your entry-level price point is, and they just don't have the resources to be able to afford what it is that you do. So with those in mind, you'll be able to back into a geographic location or locations, regions that you're targeting, and you'll be able to back into a band of a certain minimum number of employees, a certain maximum number of employees. And this will make it possible for you to use tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator or LinkedIn Campaign Manager to really fine-tune your targeting for growing awareness in this space. And then there may likely also be some business model or industry considerations where you're better suited to provide these kinds of software and services than others. So wrapping that all together, that will help you create a target account list of the companies that meet the criteria, that look like they'd be a great fit, that you'd love to be doing business with. Usually this is anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies in and around the data center industry. And then we need to know the individual kinds of stakeholders who typically want to be involved in these conversations with you, recognizing that in smaller companies, it may be a very different kind of stakeholder than in much larger companies. In larger companies, you typically would have much more specialized roles, and much smaller companies, you typically would have one person that's wearing 10 or 15 different hats, doing 10 or 15 jobs, 10 or 15 different jobs at any given time. So this is where the size targeting really impacts like who you're actually working with, the kind of stakeholders that you want to educate and build trust with at these kind of client sites. And then from there, we need to understand the insights of what makes each of these kinds of decision makers tick and who's on the decision committee in general. So we'll end up with a primary buyer persona, the most important economic stakeholder. We'll end up with a secondary buyer persona, the second most important kind of economic stakeholder when it comes to building information modeling, and perhaps a tertiary or maybe even a negative buyer persona, where when that person gets involved, it's like the kiss of death to our sales process because we just can't work with them. So with all of that in mind, we'll take the primary and the secondary, do the research, and figure out what their biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve in their job, what their team is working on, what their company is working on, and how building information modeling could help them. We'll also look at what they're stressed out about, what they're struggling with, what's causing them to miss being home in time for dinner in the evening, or messing up their vacation plans and causing them to not be around their friends and family and loved ones as much as they would like to be, because stress around building information modeling is really messing things up. So once we have the consensus on that, it becomes a lot more straightforward to create a content calendar, an educational events calendar, where we show up early and often as teachers, trusted advisors, consultants, subject matter experts, and thought leaders around anything and everything that's relevant to these kinds of stakeholders in these kinds of companies at the intersection of building information modeling, recognizing that early on, these kinds of stakeholders likely are not looking for building information modeling. That's usually something that would come in the middle to the late stages of the buyer's journey. And again, you need to, as part of your research, you'll map out the buyer's journey, but it's very likely that you'll be intercepting them on a goal or a challenge that's 2, 3, 4 or more steps ahead of them recognizing that they need a building information modeling decision. So this is where the research and getting these topics, these ideas in their own words is so incredibly important. If you just interview internal stakeholders and you go with their assumptions, a lot of times you can really miss the much more important parts of figuring out what it takes to gain awareness in the data center industry when it comes to your company's building information modeling. So this is advice that would be useful for a startup. This is advice that would be useful for a scale up, an established business. And it really just depends on where you are with your company's product roadmap, the level of maturity, how many people within your company can work on these on a regular basis. I've also seen people have a lot of success using podcasts and webinars and live streams as a thought leader to double dip a combination of creating event experiences, evergreen content for repurposing, and at the same time, continuing to create awareness and gain valuable insight as to what's going on in your industry. And you could use a combination of internal thought leaders who have some expertise that would be interesting to this particular market segment, and interview other experts in the space. Some of these experts could be your early adopters, your early clients. Some of them could just be other experts in the industry who like to get in front of a microphone and talk about anything and everything relating to building information modeling and the steps that come much earlier on in the journey. How do you know who has an affinity for being on a podcast or being on a webinar or a live stream or something like that? Because you look for signs that they are doing this elsewhere, because maybe they have their own podcast. Maybe they appear on their own company's webinars. Maybe they appear on other people's podcasts and webinars. Perhaps they speak at events on a regular basis. Maybe they guest blog. Perhaps they've published research around this. Perhaps they're active on LinkedIn or YouTube or something like that, sharing this kinds of information on a regular basis. But there's usually some breadcrumb trail of people that like to consider this community outreach, consider this education and awareness building a core part of what they're doing in their career that helps build their personal brand, their professional brand, and their company's brand. So that's another way where you can create awareness and continue to educate and trust and build trust by these collaborations, these education and trust building, thought leadership, subject matter expertise kind of collaborations for the most important stakeholders who would be most likely to be interested in your company's building information modeling, product and professional services around that. So given all of that, that's how I would approach how a building information modeling BIM startup can gain, the IM startup can gain brand awareness in and around the data center industry. And of course, you're going to want to deploy your own muscle memory and experience in this space to get even sharper and iterate in everything over time. But at the end of the day, most of your buyers don't want to spend a ton of time with vendors and sales contact until they're very far along in that buyer's journey. We need to figure out a way to get you in as early as possible, as often as possible, so you're involved in as many of those typical 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision throughout the full buyer's journey, and showing up as the teacher, the subject matter expert, the trusted advisor, the consultant, the thought leader. That's the unlock for making all of this work. So those are my thoughts on how building information modeling startups can gain brand awareness in and around the data center industry. So that's the final question that I will have time to address in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To make sure that you stay up to date on all of the new educational resources and events similar to this that DCSMI is producing and sponsoring, make sure you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing weekly email newsletter that comes directly to your inbox on Sundays. You can sign up for that directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. We wish you great success in growing your influence in the data center industry and look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great day.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.